Hello, beautiful community. Let's talk about Putin's speech and direct threat to the West following Russia using an intermediate range ballistic missile against Ukraine. That's a demonstrative gesture designed to carry for us an aura of a weapon being used that didn't but typically would carry a nuclear payload. Let's look at Putin. It's a 7-minute speech. In response to the use of American and British long-range weapons on November 21st of this year, the Russian armed forces carried out a complex strike on one of the objects of Ukraine's defense industrial complex. In combat conditions, we also tested one of the newest Russian medium-range missile systems, in this case a ballistic missile equipped with a non-nuclear hypersonic payload. Our missile engineers named it Oreshnik. I'm going to leave it to military experts to dispute how far this is a new weapon at all, as opposed to a remake of something that is well known. So what I'm going to say about Putin's speech is really two things. He is making two emphases there. One is about the futility of disinhibiting Ukraine with ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles. And the other is about the danger of doing that to the West. So let's look at the futility bit. Putin says, I want to particularly emphasize once again that the adversary's use of such weapons cannot influence the course of combat operations in the area of the special military operation. It's futile. Don't do it. Next, it's dangerous, so don't do it. He said the conflict has now taken on a global character it didn't have before. And he said, the issue of further deployment of medium and shorter range missiles will be decided by us depending on the actions of the US and its satellites. The targets for destruction in the further tests of our latest missile complexes will be determined by us based on the security threats to the Russian Federation. And now comes the key sentence, which really translates, I have a right to strike UK, USA, and France. We consider ourselves to have a right to use our weapons against the military objects of those countries that allow their weapons to be used against our military objects. Let's talk about this. How did Putin look? He looked composed, calm and confident. So he wasn't speaking as he did at the time of the Prigozhin mutiny or in the early days of the war or during moments when the war was going badly. And that's partly a reflection of what is my analysis, namely that Putin thinks he is winning the war. So he was calm, composed and confident, right? I'm, in a position where whatever game's developing, it's going to turn out reasonably well for me. So what exactly is this gambit about? How should we frame it? Well, at a very minimal level, it's about making you, Western citizens, freak out, right? So the escalation here is the demonstrative use of a novel delivery system that hadn't been used before, and it's meant to have a certain kind of whiff, a sort of echo of a strategic nuclear exchange. So fear, paranoia, or trauma is what's desired in Western citizenry. The specific political effect is to arm anti-Ukraine voices, anti-Ukraine support voices in the West with an even stronger message about how Biden's policy is failing and endangering the world. What's the level of effectiveness of that gambit from Putin? I think that the level of effectiveness is reasonably strong, or at least it's sufficient. So I think that there's a lot of folks in Western corridors of power who are not buying this stuff, but at the same time, it does have a compelling corrosive impact. So there's no way you could give Putin a 0 out of 10 for efficacy here. He's getting not a very high score, but a reasonable score. Now, my analysis of the specific workings of Putin's nuclear posturing is always about 4 elements, and you can watch a main channel video about this. I think most of you have by now. And so that's deliberate ambiguity, post-truth manipulation, monarchical secrecy. That's to say, when Putin is speaking now, it's part of the intended effect that people in his regime don't know what he means, right? There will be people in Putin's regime talking to each other about, well, did he? Or he did, didn't he? Did, or did he not? Or he did. He did say, right? France, UK, and USA. That's what it's supposed to mean when he says, folks who, facilitate Ukraine to use these weapons are going to be reasonable targets for us. Oh, he did. So could he? Surely not, but maybe he could. So that's also part of how the blackmail works, that the regime is itself uncertain about what it's going to do. And there's a domestic audience effect. That's the 4th element. So deliberate ambiguity, post-truth manipulation, monarchical secrecy, and domestic audience focus. Now, there is a special risk here for Putin, moving on to another point, and that's that at some point, not yet, he may run out of escalation options, putting himself in a corner whereby he has to either engage in a demonstrative and limited use of nuclear weapons, or he has to back down. He hasn't reached that stage yet, but at some point, it's a corner he could run himself into. What about us and how we talk about all of this? The way we talk about this really matters, and you're going to laugh at me for saying this if you know me well, because there's something very special about the connection between nuclear risk and democracy. And that's to say that, and you're going to laugh because I always connect everything to democracy, right? Democracy does not last unless it's tethered to the practiced virtue of daily hemp milk making in your kitchen. So, but I'm serious about this. Because nuclear risk, even when it's low, is so existential, and I'm not even talking about Putin and Russia here, I'm just talking in general. Because it's about everything, it's about life and death. Clear-headed and sober conversation about this in a democracy is really important. And that, I say, pushing against the double algorithmic risk, right? That the algorithms are pushing right now thousands of platforms to create excessive fear and paranoia about nuclear Armageddon. Algorithms are propping that up, right? If you're a prepper channel on this platform on YouTube, sorry if you're watching this on Twitter, you're going to be inclined to say we're in the precipice of World War III, even though we're not. So there's this algorithmic incentive to gamify nuclear risk. And it also works the other way, right? For instance, most of you watching this are in a bubble where the algorithm strongly pushes people to make claims like Putin could never use nuclear weapons, right? So we're in a kind of a bizarre, atypical bubble where the algorithm rewards minimizing nuclear risk. But that too is a form of gamification. So you don't want to say that we're in some kind of nuclear precipice, but you also don't want to say there is no nuclear risk at all for algorithmic reasons. And that's why responsible conversation matters. You've got to respect fellow citizens here who feel differently and judge differently to you. Not agree with their views, but respect them. Because in a democracy, talk of existential issues is itself a sign of being democratically spirited, right? So if you're just flagrantly dismissing people who are sincere and thoughtful but have the wrong view, in your opinion, that's an undemocratic sentiment on your part. So consider this. Now, what do I actually think is the nuclear risk over the coming weeks? I'm a political philosopher, so I need to be clear that no military analysis plays a part in my picture here. But my political judgment certainly points toward very low nuclear risk for several reasons, one of them being that Putin is keen to see what happens under Trump, and he is particularly disinclined to do something that is dramatic before he has had a taste of what the Trump administration has to offer, especially as Putin feels that there is a good chance that it may offer something palatable to him and unpalatable to Ukraine. So I think it's reasonable to say that while in total we're in a nuclearly risky historical moment, that the idea that there's going to be extreme and special nuclear risk over the coming days and weeks is for me under-supported. I do not think that it is remotely likely from where we stand, right, that Putin would use nuclear weapons in the coming weeks. However, I have shared repeatedly an argument, there is actually a main channel video, there'll be one of the videos I attach at the end of this, that Putin is not the same agent of nuclear rationality as Western leaders today or as Soviet leaders were. That's to say, because of the regime's more mystical and apocalyptic qualities, I do believe Putin is actually more likely in general to use nuclear weapons than any Soviet leader. So if you want to learn more about why I'm making this argument about Putin's somewhat mystical nuclear rationality, there's a main channel video about this, and I'm going to put that here if you're watching on YouTube. And if you haven't seen the how to see through the bullshit of Putin's nuclear blackmail video, I'm going to put it on that side. Thank you for being with me, but just once again to say, despite these remarks, right, about Putin's nuclear rationality being a concern, I see nuclear risk as very low over the coming weeks. Lots of love.